The fire was small, but the sound was not. It began with a thick, acrid smell of burning insulation at 0.18 hours, followed by a heavy, continuous hiss that cut through the usual dockside quiet. First Mate Gordon Finch, on watch on the SS Atlantic Drifter's foredeck, saw the glow immediately. It was a vicious orange light spilling out from the junction box recessed into Pier 9, roughly 8 feet from the ship's hull. But the danger was not the box. The danger was what the fire had found. The flames were licking directly at the thick 7-inch hawser of the starboard spring line, where the heavy synthetic fiber met the steel mooring eye. "Check the aft lines. Get the deck hose on the pier immediately." Finch snapped the order to Seaman First Class Miller, who was standing at tired watch near the gangway. Miller scrambled for the fire station, pulling the heavy canvas hose from its reel. Finch ran to the rail, assessing the situation. The fiber hawser was already smoldering, the black jacket peeling back to reveal the white core, which was melting and dripping in brilliant chemical drops onto the concrete. The pier fire was spreading sideways along a spill of oil residue which had collected near the electrical box. The ship was moving. She was a heavy vessel, 500 feet of bulk carrier, but the ebb tide and the stiff cold wind were working to pull her off the dock. The starboard spring line, which was supposed to absorb that primary strain, was now compromised by the heat. As the line softened and stretched, the load immediately transferred. Finch felt it, a low, resonant thrum that ran through the steel deck plating beneath his boots. He looked forward and aft. The forward breast line was now bar-tight, rigid as iron. The aft spring was also groaning audibly, the massive fibers stretching beyond their operational limit. The lines were showing tension beyond the harbor master's protocol for the current weather. If the burning spring line failed, the sudden, violent recoil would snap the remaining lines in sequence, ripping the drifter violently away from the pier and sending her adrift into the main channel. Bridge, foredeck, report emergency fire pier side, starboard spring line compromised. Hold number 3 area, Finch called into the handheld radio, his voice sharp and controlled. Captain Hollis's voice was instantaneous. Duster Bridge hears you, Mr. Finch. Confirm fire at the line. Affirmative, Captain. The synthetic line is burning rapidly, flames moving toward the deck fittings. Requested City Fire Department immediately. We are attempting suppression with the deck hose. Suppress it, Finch. Do not let it touch the deck paint. I am calling the local authority now. What is the efficiency of the deck hose? Low, Captain. The pier runoff is minimal, and the fire is feeding on synthetic materials and an oil slick. We are applying water directly to the line to slow thermal decomposition. Miller, applying the full force of the hose was having little effect. The water only turned the burning material into heavy, localized steam, which dissipated rapidly in the night air. The core of the hawser, protected by the outer sheath, continued to heat. Finch could smell the varnish and paint on the hull beginning to blister from the radiant heat. Finch sprinted to the cargo hatch for hold number 3. This was the critical point. The main deck paint was blistering from the ambient heat within 4 feet of the line fitting. Hold number 3 contained a mixed cargo, listed on the manifest as general goods, but Finch knew the reality from the special handling sheet. 3 dozen 50-gallon drums of industrial solvent, paint thinners, and acetone were stowed in the lower levels, secured under standard netting. If the deck paint ignited, the fire could spread to the hatch tarpaulin, burn through the sealant, and allow superheated air and flame access to the cargo hold atmosphere. 15 minutes. City fire response time was usually 15 minutes minimum from the alarm call. In 15 minutes, the main deck would be compromised and the risk of a vapor explosion in the cargo hold would climb exponentially. He ran to the forward mooring station. The winches were cold and sluggish. He found the second mate, Mr. Daniels, already there, roused by the radio alarm, pulling on his boots. "Daniels, the forward lines are stressed. Get me a friction block and gauge. We need an accurate reading of the headline tension before the spring line fails." Daniels grabbed the specified equipment from the winch house locker. "Tension is near max, sir. The steel wire is vibrating against the fairlead." "I know. Now move the headline slightly to port, reduce the strain on the stern, slack the forward breast line by 2 feet. Slowly. We need to redistribute the load or the aft spring will pop first." Daniels, realizing the implication, worked the winch motor With clinical precision, the gear groaned under the tension. The steel wire rope was emitting a sound that was not just noise, but raw, contained energy, a high-pitched ee. The friction of the steel against the fair lead. Finch monitored the gauge reading. "Hold it, Daniels. Maintain that 2-foot slack." The gauge shows the headline is at 90,000 pounds of force. That's too high for a shock transfer. The realization was immediate. They couldn't reduce the tension enough by slacking the forward lines without running a greater risk of losing the aft lines to the tide. The headline was going to take the full whipping force of the ship's momentum when the burning spring line parted. Finch had to choose between a guaranteed ship fire and a calculated high-risk attempt to break the cycle. He slammed the gauge down. The fire on the pier was now roaring, the flames reaching the deck railing. "Daniels, stop slacking. Hold the line rigid. Get me the fire axe, the big one from the emergency locker, and bring the heavy-duty wire cutter too, the one for the messenger lines." Finch grabbed a heavy pair of leather gloves from the locker and adjusted his industrial safety glasses. He walked back to the burning line. The white braided core was now exposed, melting rapidly. The hissing sound was louder, sharper. The fire was within 3 feet of the ship's rail. He keyed the radio, his voice flat. "Bridge, Finch, tactical change. We cannot sufficiently relieve the load. I am preparing to sever the starboard spring line immediately. Manual cut. Stand by for high tension." "Finch, that steel-braided wire inside that hawser. Are you sure? That recoil could take out the winch house." Captain Hollis's voice was strained at the first crack of alarm. "It's a thick synthetic fiber hawser, Captain, no wire core, but it is carrying the primary load. If I cut it, the steel headline will take the shock. I assess failure is imminent if we wait. The pier fire is spreading up the hull. I am severing the line to prevent deck ignition and potential hold fire. The risk of the cut is less than the risk of the fire reaching the solvent barrels. Request final approval for non-standard emergency procedure." There was a deafening pause of 8 seconds, measured only by the hiss of the burning fiber and the thrum of the stressed headline. "Approved, Finch. The integrity of the cargo hold takes precedence. Proceed with the cut. Report status instantly." The line was still smoking where the water had hit it, but the part closest to the junction box was now an inferno. The flame was a narrow vertical column climbing the fiber. Daniels arrived, breathing hard, carrying the large red-painted emergency axe and the heavy 2-handed wire cutters. "The cutters won't go through, Mr. Finch, not at this tension." "I know. The axe is the tool. The core is already compromised by heat. We need to split the remaining fibers quickly and cleanly. We are aiming for the center mass where the burn is hottest. Do not touch the headline. That steel wire will recoil and cut you in half. Destiny." Finch pointed the toe of his boot at the spot about a foot above the flames. "Right there. Low stance. Swing for the center mass." "You swing first. I finish. Go to the pier." Finch and Daniels descended the gangway. The concrete below their feet was scorching hot near the junction box. The steel wire headline, running parallel to the spring line, was vibrating violently, carrying the immense residual tension. They were standing in the immediate kill zone. Daniels positioned himself, taking a wide, firm stance. He brought the heavy axe back, the red metal catching the reflection of the dock lights and the fire. Whoomp! The first blow was not a clean cut, but a dull, sickening thud. The axe hit the taut, burning hawser, burying the blade 3 inches deep into the softened, melting synthetic fiber. The line did not break. It stretched slightly, making a deep, low groan that was felt through the concrete. The entire structure of the ship seemed to lean further off the pier for a second. "Pull it, Daniels, again!" Finch shouted over the intensifying wind. Daniels pulled the axe free, a terrible struggle against the friction, and swung again, hitting the same spot with a focused, desperate heave. The second blow cut deeper, severing more than half the remaining load-bearing fibers. The inner, white core of the hawser was now clearly visible, and the tension released a sharp shing sound. The ship surged slightly, pulling the line further apart. Finch grabbed the axe. Daniels stepped back, breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. Finch felt the tremendous immediate tension in the line, a living, vibrating thing. He had to sever the majority of the fibers in one final strike to ensure a clean break, reducing the snap-back force. Failure now meant the line would fray slowly, creating a violent, uncontrolled recoil. He raised the axe high, focusing on the narrow remaining band of uncut fiber. He drove the axe down with all his remaining strength, aiming precisely at the existing split. The third blow was a complete split. Crack, whip. It was not a dull sound, but a sharp, violent explosion. The severed ends of the synthetic hawser separated instantly. The burning end snapped back, falling uselessly onto the pier, the fire continuing to burn itself out in a final puddle of molten synthetic material. The other end, attached to the ship's cleat, recoiled with a violent thwack against the ship's hull, then dropped dead. The entire ship shuddered violently as the 90,000-pound load transferred instantly to the remaining steel wire lines. For one critical second, the steel headline next to Finch screamed, the terrifying "ee" rising to a pitch just before the wire rope's breaking point. The wire rope vibrated so fiercely it was only a blur in the darkness. Finch did not move. He waited, standing over the severed line, his eyes fixed on the remaining steel headline. He checked the tension gauge that Daniels had placed on the ground nearby. It was useless now. The transfer was complete. The scream died down to a low, stable hum. The tension had stabilized. The headline, taut as a piano wire, was holding the entire load. The forward breastline was now carrying the residual load, aided by the aft spring. Daniels' immediate inspection checked the headline for any sign of deformation or broken strands. Used the light. Daniels, shaking off the shock of the snap, directed his heavy-duty flashlight onto the now stable steel wire. He ran the beam methodically along the entire section visible near the fairlead. No visible kinks or broken strands, Mr. Finch. It's tight, but it's holding. Bridge, Finch, starboard spring line severed cleanly at 27 hours. Fire contained to pier 1 cable length from hull. No deck ignition. Headline holding stable. Request immediate visual. Confirmation of the headline from the pier camera if available. Understood, Finch. Line cut confirmed. Pier camera feed confirms headline integrity. We are stable. Fire department is 3 minutes out. Report to the bridge for log verification immediately. Captain Hollis's voice was calmer now, the crisis contained. The fire on the pier continued to burn, isolated to the junction box and the ground spill. The main threat to the vessel was neutralized. The Atlantic drifter was secured by 3 taut lines instead of 4, but the immediate fire hazard was gone. Finch handed the axe back to Daniels. Secure the axe, Daniels. Get 2 men to wet down the pier area continuously. Do not let that oil residue flare up again. Check the remaining lines for chafe at the bollards and fairleads. I'm reporting to the bridge. The procedure was now maintenance and observation, not crisis management. The high-tension risk was over. He ascended the gangway, ignoring the residual smoke and the metallic smell of stress. On the bridge, Captain Hollis was already filling out the preliminary incident report. He gestured to the logbook. Record the event, Mr. Finch. Detail the estimated load transfer and the necessity of the manual cut. You logged the decision well. Finch moved to the ship's logbook. He wrote with the precision of a man logging weather data, using technical, concise language, recording the tension, the fire, the decision matrix, and the final cut. No mention of the heat, the sweat, or the sheer terror of standing next to a steel wire under a breaking load. Only procedure. 0.27 ERs. Starboard spring line severed manually with fire axe. Procedure executed to mitigate imminent deck fire and chemical cargo threat in hold North 3. Load transferred to starboard headline. Line verified stable at 0029 Argiers. The city fire department arrived with a loud grinding blast of air brakes. The heavy stream of their high-pressure hose immediately extinguished the remaining dockside fire. Finch stood watch for 2 more hours, overseeing the final dousing of the junction box and the initial structural inspection of the pier. He remained on the foredeck until a replacement crew from the Port Authority arrived with a temporary mooring line. Only when the 4th line was securely knotted and fully taking its share of the load did Finch finally step down from the watch. The severed synthetic hawser lay on the concrete, its fibers melted, fused, and brittle. A final silent monument to the crisis. Post-incident investigation summary. USCG file 1968 Bale 907. The subsequent inspection of the SS Atlantic drifter at Pier 9, Baltimore, was conducted by the U.S. Coast Guard and the Port Authority. The investigation confirmed that the pier junction box failure was due to aged wiring and saltwater intrusion. The synthetic starboard spring line was found to be fully severed at the point of impact. Forensic analysis of the line's remaining fibers confirmed that at the moment of severing, the uncut inner core was sustaining an estimated 88% of its maximum tensile strength, confirming the imminent spontaneous failure cited by the first mate. The investigation further measured the residual load on the starboard headline, the adjacent steel wire rope. Calculation determined that the headline was momentarily subjected to 97.3% of its rated breaking strain immediately following the shock transfer from the synthetic line. The report noted that the rapid, controlled cut, though high risk, provided a significantly cleaner load transfer than an uncontrolled snap would have. An analysis of the Hold No. 3 cargo manifest and the deck materials confirmed that at the time of the severing, Air 027 HRs, the temperature above the hatch was sufficient to cause ignition of the deck paint within 5 minutes. The presence of acetone and amique solvents in the lower hold, combined with the lack of direct fire suppression on the pier, created a high probability of a confined vapor explosion had the fire reached the cargo hold atmosphere. The report concluded that First Mate Finch's decision to execute an immediate controlled severing of the load-bearing spring line, despite the adjacent high-tension steel line, was a critical maneuver that prevented a deck-level fire and the associated catastrophic risk to the cargo. The action was categorized as a calculated procedural necessity under imminent peril, demonstrating exceptional adherence to the preservation of vessel and cargo.